Hey guys, it's Charles Chambers at ZoomTheTBT, and tonight we're doing the Transfer Portal edition. So I'd like to introduce first our guest analyst from the next prospect, Tom Ballato. Tom, I'm going to go ahead and stop the share so we can see your pretty face. How you doing today?
I'm good. How's everything with you?
Not too bad. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, before we get into the whole slide deck, a little bit about what the next prospect covers since you're our guest tonight.
I cover a lot of Americans playing professionally overseas. I was a former high school basketball coach. I'm a school teacher, so I kind of didn't have time to coach anymore. And I figured I would reach out to some former players I followed in college and guys that had a cup of coffee in the NBA and just are overseas and you don't hear about them. So I show love to those guys. And that's how I fell in love with the TBT.
That was my next question. Basically, it dovetails really nicely into you being a TBT guy because there is this basketball – because people forget that there's only 450 or so NBA jobs. Like, there's 451 still a great basketball player, and their stories deserve an avenue to be told. So what's been the most interesting thing you've learned covering European basketball?
Your job could be taken from you in a moment. If your team's struggling, your team's losing, some of those guys get cut real quick. And, it's not like they have a guarantee. They could, get a place over there for 9 months and they might not have a job after 2. So it's very different. Things can change for you in a heartbeat, but a lot of the guys, they have their pros and their cons about playing basketball overseas. Some horrible stories, not getting paid on time, things promised and then things turn out bad. But for the most part, there's a lot of good stories.
That makes sense. What is the overarching thing you've heard a lot in the COVID season? Because remember, the NBA had a bubble. Europe has a lot of you're playing a lot of different regional teams. You're playing the European Championships. You're playing like all these different things where you're playing like at the cup level in multiple countries. How has COVID shaped what you've heard about the European leagues this year?
Well, China is in basically a big hub city in like 2 hotels, and they're playing games at a couple courts that are about 20 miles or 20 minutes away from each other. I know Australia, if you go there, you're at 14-day quarantine. You're inside a hotel for 2 weeks before you could, even practice with your team. They seem to have a season that's been going on without any interruptions. The same with China because they're in a hub city. I know Italy has taken a couple breaks this year, some lockdowns. So it's been uncertain. It seems more in Europe than some of the other countries, but for the most part, they're having seasons.
Yeah, and you're talking a lot. You mentioned that also about the guys can lose their jobs in a minute. It kind of tells nicely into, so you're a college guy. I'm also a college guy. My co-host who's standing the night off, Charge, is more of a G League guy. So this is a conversation that you and I will understand more. The concept of the transfer portal, like this has been a big thing that's happened a lot at the college level this year. Some notable transfers, teams losing guys. And the TBT going from 24 teams in a bubble to 64 teams, the full 64. How volatile does that make this year's sort of TBT transfer market, you think?
I think it's going to be very volatile. You're going to see guys that, I like to say the TBT has the transfer portal as soon as a team doesn't make it. So they'll have, 64 teams this year, right? And, team 65, 66, 67 that don't make it might have a good player that could, make a splash in the TBT. So usually when those teams don't get the cut, you'll see another free agency wave and guys will add their 9th or 10th guy to a roster. But you're going to see a lot of movement this year. And I think it'll be good. It might, spread out the competition a little bit more. But at the same time, you got to love the run that Sideline Cancer made last year. So you never know. It might dilute a team, but at the same time, it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, Sideline was interesting because they added Stone, and we thought they'd be inside force. They ended up not really being able to play for them as many minutes. And then where they relied on Thompson to rebound and just had that 3-headed backcourt of Abel, Creek, and, of course, Marcus Keene, who will be on the show soon. And you had these guys just completely ball out from the outside to really make that happen with Thompson doing the dirty work. So they were able to get past having a player they thought they could count on and not be able to play. So let's get into the individual transfers. I'm going to start sharing the screen, and we can talk a little bit about the individual transfers because we've got some really solid ideas of some guys that could move. Now, Tom and I talked about this. A lot of these guys, we kind of know where they might go. So some of this is for conversation, but these are sort of the decisions that people need to make. So will I be correct in saying these are not so much decisions that may not be made, but these are indicative decisions that could be made, correct? That's a good way of putting it?
Yeah, I would put it that way with those players.
Yeah, so let's start with
they've got decisions to make.
Sure. So let's talk about probably the most important one on the list, which would be, of course, Jabari Williams, who last year was a big part of that's very surprising. Heard that run. He's playing in Italy. He's putting up 18 a game. He is balling out in Europe. And he had a transfer in college. So he played for Middle Tennessee and Arkansas. And there's a lot of different options he could go with. So what are your thoughts about not just where he's going to go, but like what the stakes are in Jabari's commitment?
Well, I mean, heard that. I mean, you can't deny the talent and the shooting they had. They weren't the fastest team, but having him on that team as like the slasher that just went to the rim and just dunked, and he was a lot of a hustle for that team. He kind of pushed the tempo, even though that team didn't really push it too much. I think heard that he was a big part of that, but at the same time, I'm not sure where his loyalties lie because he did have a transfer. If I was going to pick a second team, I would pick Team Arkansas, but I'm thinking he stays.
Yeah, it's interesting too because this is probably maybe the most interesting decision on the board because obviously Jabari, as you're saying, plays that agile big who gets balls to shooters like the Elmore brothers and can get his off cuts, get his off the dirty work, giving him a mobile guy who can really bang but also get out and run. So he unlocks a lot of lineups for a team that likes to move. Heard that obviously would love having back. I think currently he's on their roster, but I think Team Arkansas might make a move. Because with Barford, it unlocks a lot of guys to get and pick and roll. And I think Jabari could really, with Barford on that sort of 1-4 high, could really start to – that would be a really dangerous pick and roll pairing, I think. So there's a lot going on here. I will say the idea of him playing for Middle Tennessee, like it almost the difference in Middle Tennessee getting a bid or not, wouldn't you think? Like Jabari, if he were to commit to the true blue team, really gets them in the field, I think. Like they're more of a team that like needs to find a way to qualify, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I think that – they would need him to qualify in order for them to make it there. I mean, there's no denying alumni teams, but they seem like they're on the outside looking in, but having him on the roster could get them that vote to get in.
So he probably is almost the most impactful transfer portal player we could think of. Let's go a little bit further down the list. We've got JP Makura, who was an Eberline Drive commit last year. And of course, they got knocked out by COVID. They had the horrible luck of having a jacked team and just having a stupid virus like sideline them. Currently, he's rocking in Turkey, 18 a game. He went to Xavier, though, which makes this an interesting discussion because I personally still think he's an Eberline Drive lean, but not only is Zip him up running a team, he had mentioned him. He actually tweeted about it once. So this is a really difficult decision, I think, to be honest with you.
Yeah, as somebody who covered Eberline Drive, and I was supposed to cover them last year, I actually spoke with JP. He was excited to play. I believe that was going to be his first time playing in the TBT, and he just spoke about his career. He had a chance with multiple NBA teams, didn't really get his opportunity. He was talking about, hey, I'm heading overseas for the first time. And he's having a great rookie season overseas. Eberline
18
Drive,
a game, he's killing it. Yeah, 18 a game, and he's just killing it.
Yeah, and Eberline Drive, 2 years ago in Utah, they made a run. Right after that, Jerome Randall got hurt, and they kind of went with the new look. They retired Randall's jersey. He wasn't going to play last year because he was recovering. They moved on from Donald Sloan, and it looked like they brought in Makura, and then we're going to talk about Hannah's next. They brought in, these new faces, and I really think they had a really legit squad, and Matt Mitchell did a great job with that.
Jacob, too. They have a great co-GM. They have a really solid GM pair.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, as friends with Matt, I think Matt might have a hard time because I don't know where his loyalties are going to line. Eberline Drive he could be, the face of that team, but I don't know. He played Big East school with Xavier, and I don't know. I did the tweet. Uh, they he could be that face that gets that team in.
Well, it's a slightly different situation, I think, with Zip 'em Up. I think that, like, even without Makura, they're probably in because Xavier's got a huge fan base. And they can probably get a pretty good roster. So I think there might be a cut or two above True Blue. So I think without Makura, they're in. But definitely, you're looking at a really low seed without him. So he's the kind of guy who can electrify that backcourt. This lets you know, too, just because we call it our own misses here occasionally, this deck was in a hurry. I think I got the rebounds wrong. I'm pretty sure that's someone else's rebound total. So that's not right. There's no way. Maybe he is putting that many rebounds a game. I don't remember. Get in a hurry. So I'm more than willing to call it my own tech guy's problems here. So we got that big decision. Brandon Paul, this one really intrigues me because there was a first-time Illini alum team last year, and it didn't look loaded for Bear until they started adding players, and playing for Team Heinz is a big deal. Heinz goes out in the first round. Heinz gets done by Keene and Abel and Creek and Thompson, the sideline guys, and the Illini alum, House of Pain, won a few games. So, like, this becomes a really interesting decision about where he's going to go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much longer Team Heinz can be in this tournament if they're not going to put their best foot forward. I know last year was a different year. Team Heinz put out a great squad the first year. I mean, that might be hard again to pull off. I like the Ethan Happ move. I would like to see Kyle Heinz play in it again. Brandon Paul's a big name. I think it can go either way. I think Brandon Paul's decision is going to be off of what Team Heinz roster is going to look like, what guys are going to actually commit to the team. We had it listed, but Mike James is signing with the Brooklyn Nets, so I don't think he's going to be playing in this tournament. So there's Team Heinz lost somebody already. So tough one. If I had to make a choice, I think he's going to choose based off of the roster. If Mike Dom's going to House of Pain, I think you, as Brandon Paul, you gotta look at that and choose House of Pain.
Well, plus the host thing helps too, because they're in already. Not that they would deny Heinz. Heinz is obviously going to put a bunch of Euro studs out there. So they're going to have a roster. Like both these rosters, I always say the quality of your decision making, whether you make a good decision or not, is based on the quality of the options you have to decide upon. In this case, you've got two loaded Bear for squads. So he can go either way. I like to see Kyle Heinz play too. I mean, new team owner Kyle Heinz, I might add. He now is a part owner of an Australian squad, which is really cool. I think this ends up being an Illini go, though, with Dom, with the regional, with the reemergence of Illini basketball. Most of you know I'm a Memphis fan, but I'm actually got my master's from Illinois. So I'm always kind of interested a little bit, too, in Illinois basketball because that's where I learned how to draw buildings a little bit better, I guess. But I think he ends up in Peoria, personally. But I don't know. This is a really tough decision. Moving along, this one's not really a tough decision, but it's worth mentioning, more in the context of the bubble team. So Scott Machado, Australian MVP, 17 a game still, put up big numbers from Iona. Iona did not make it last year, one of the last teams out. In fact, we're definitely going to have those guys on for one of our theme shows about revenge, about the snub teams, because I think they're going to be really coming to hurt people this year after last year. So Armored Athlete was able to cobble together some players off some friendly rosters. So, and they had a great run. So the reality is, if you wanted to have that run and celebrate that, you could see him coming back and living the lifestyle of AJ and Jess and those guys. But the reality is, like, again, the alumni pull is really high, isn't it, Tom?
Yeah, I was actually going to speak with Gale Nation. I actually spoke with them last year, John Kiggins. I was going to come out with an article, and then they didn't get picked, so I was holding off on that. I think he's going to go back to Gale Nation. I think that, they have a really strong alumni base, alumni team. I've been talking with them for years on, suggesting some alum to play. And there's been a lot of guys in the past that, have been playing overseas that, you can't see on this roster. I'm I don't even consider Armored Athlete. I think Gale Nation it is. And I would love to see him team up with Momo Jones again. And if Momo decides to ever play in the TBT, I think that backcourt would be great.
Yeah, I find it interesting too, because I also think it's like a 95% chance he goes back to Gale Nation, especially if they're able to run. This slide's more about the context of what happened last year, about the idea of the insane roster of people. Because he played for Armored, he obviously had a good time. Like, he enjoyed his run, I'm sure. But the alumni pool is just too strong. So I can't imagine him going back to Armored. But it's more of a contextual argument about like what it means to play for a team and then switch after a year, especially in a weird COVID year. Okay, the big prize, Joe Johnson, 7-time NBA All-Star, free agent, currently not with a job. That's more at the point of like, that's going to happen at some point. And he might go back to the big three, the summer's second best basketball event, obviously, if you're into half courts and threes and, not playing defense. But anyway, point being is he can go back there. But if he comes back to the TBT, I mean, you can go back with Overseas Elite. He is an Arkansas alum, which would put them over the top. And, I mean, it's more of a joke putting Hurd there. But wouldn't it be fun to see, instead of Ottenham doing battle, Ottenham joining forces?
Yeah, I mean, that would be fun. I just don't see it. I don't know. If I had to pick a team, I think Overseas Elite. Overseas Elite is, last year they coughed up a win, and they've been close. This team, Overseas Elite, could easily have won almost every year. They've coughed it up a few times lately. Their team just hasn't been the same. And I know last year with COVID, their roster on the TBT website was changing. It was changing almost daily, it seemed. Like you were updating it and you were saying, oh, this guy's going to come on and everything. I'm happy he played. I think he's good for the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
I think if he went with the villain and played with Overseas Elite again, it would give Overseas Elite that, number one spot in their bracket, or maybe a number two. I mean, it depends where they decide to play. I know DJ Kennedy and those guys are still hungry. And you have to think that they're recruiting Joe. Probably started right after their loss from last year. But
yeah.
I don't know. Does he choose to go with the alumni team, or, like you said, he can go to the big three and not even be in this tournament. But I think it'd be good if he went back to Overseas Elite.
I mean, if you can avoid having to run full court, I mean, and get paid to play a half court game, by all means. I mean, skip the cardio, right? But no, I mean, I think it's an interesting decision. I think if he plays in TBT, I can see him going to Arkansas because – so Arkansas to me is by far the biggest transfer market teams. They already have Barford, which unfortunately probably spells the end of the underdogs, especially if some of the other teams have added from those underdog cores. So Jackson's probably done. But Arkansas already has Barford, and they have a bunch of guys on this list, in fact. We're going to talk to Hannah's in a minute, or talk about Hannah's in a minute, but you've also got Joe. You've got Ja'Cory. I mean, if you can add 1, 2, or God forbid all 3, you go from a team that will contend to a favorite. So the biggest upside team in this entire transfer market, I think, might be Team Arkansas. I don't think Joe ends up going there. I really think Joe does end up in the big 3, which is, a fun league. Let's be clear. It's a fun time. But if he goes to Arkansas, that would be a really interesting story, I think, about what the alumni teams could do.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think Team Arkansas has got a good team building. I think he'd put them over the top. But like I said, I just think that Overseas Elite has been has been in the wings waiting for their chance to win this tournament again. And you have to think that they're going to have something up their sleeve to get even better.
Yeah, that would make sense, actually. I mean, they haven't won in a few years, which for them is a long time. Speaking of Dusty, look at that baby face. He's so cute. Okay, so last year, Eberline, part of that Makura Hannah's backcourt that we didn't see due to COVID, which is obnoxious. There's a decision to make here, obviously. And this one's also a really interesting one. Do you play with Barford, where you're going to get some open looks in the wing, or do you run it back to the team that recruited you last year and has usually a pretty good roster of their own? Like, this is a pretty interesting decision, I think.
Mm-hmm. And Eberline's going to have that problem of not being an alumni team. you're going to have I know Eberline likes to throw out a very good roster every year, but these guys that they're taking they have alumni teams in the, waiting in the wings. If I had to choose, I'm going to have to say, sorry, Matt. I think he does go with Team Arkansas.
Yeah, it's really curious. Go ahead.
He never officially played a game with Eberline, and I mean, I don't know where his loyalties lie and everything, but when Eberline dropped that roster last year, it was like, wow, this team could be the team to beat. I know they had their COVID and they, just got disqualified, but, I'm thinking Team Arkansas has got to be, pitching pretty hard for him.
Yeah, I mean, this is also one of those really interesting tweeners. I mean, the deal with Eberline is obviously they have one of the best coaches in TBT, says the Memphis fan about, Cody Toppin, obviously. But, I mean, it's definitely a tough decision to be made. There's some other people, too. I mean, we didn't get into everyone, but there's some really interesting decisions on here. And some of these we know. Like Jeff Gibbs started We Are D3 because he's a D3 guy. But, I mean, he's going to go back to Carmen's if he plays. On this list, the ones that interest me, like Kennedy, I mean, he has an NBA two-way now. Congratulations, by the way, Devin. Very cool. It was on the show last year. So good for the Princeton boy getting that NBA money. That's a thrilling thing to see, tournament to NBA. So good for Devin. That's amazing. Friend of the pod. There's a really bunch of interesting decisions here. What strikes you off this board as like a decision that's kind of interesting to you?
I mean, we talked about it earlier, Remy Abel. I don't think he's leaving sideline, but they do have an alumni team. So I think it's very hard to leave that team. That was like the Cinderella of the TBT last year. And they're not a Cinderella anymore. I think that team and just what they had going, I think, why try seeing if the grass is greener on the other side when it's just good where you are now?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we put Remy on there merely because they have an alumni team. I don't think it's a decision. I think what the run sidelines had with how long he's been in that program, he's played for them for a number of years. I don't see this being a decision even, but it's just something we wanted to list to show that this is the poll of the alumni teams. What's more interesting to me is like the guys who like have teams that might run. Like, for example, like we have a tournament in Kansas. Will Self-Made reconsist? Will they get Josh Selby out of the Misfits, who I think that's where he's going to try to play this year? Will they steal Tyshawn Taylor and get a Taylor-Selby backcourt to make Self-Made a factor? Will they try to force that to happen? The idea of the house team, Heartfire was almost one of the TBT house teams that got a lot of players when Team 23 wasn't able to get in. Well, Team 23 coming back, can they get Adams back, Owens, Wood? Can they reload that squad? Or does the Sons of Westwood take Adams back? Like, Adams is a guy who has lots of different loyalties. And, of course, the Casper Ware question, like, is he going to play with the Cheaters? If he plays with the Cheaters, they're an immediate contender because by himself, he can just put up buckets.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Team ALS, I love their cause. I love what they do. They always have a good roster, and then it seems like a guy that they have on their roster goes somewhere else. And they're always, I mean, they are always there. I don't know. I think he's an interesting name. I'd like to see him go back with Team ALS because I think that team's due to make a run or due to upset a team soon. Another name that really pops out to me is Fletcher McGee. And,
yeah.
I know I think they're War Eagle now. Did they change their name? I know they're.
Actually, it's War Ready. I actually didn't correct that. Yeah, it was War Tampa last year. Now it's War Ready. And by the way, War Ready's announced a lot of their roster. And as of yet, Fletcher McGee is not listed.
Yeah.
And TNT is running. So that's an interesting thing there.
And if you remember, TNT was the first team to really put out a roster last year.
A loaded roster last year. Loaded.
And I was thinking about that team. I actually wrote an article on them. They did not get selected, which was very unfortunate. But when you looked at that team that was released last year, Antonio Blakeney, Kenny Boynton, Devon Akun-Purcell, they had Eric Griffin on their roster originally, Fletcher McGee, Rob Gray, who's been in the TBT for a while now.
Houston boy, right?
Yeah, Houston.
Yeah, big score for Houston.
Yeah,
Tortured Memphis.
they
Tortured
had a bunch
Memphis.
of scorers on their team, and I think McGee was that outside threat that really, could spread the floor. They just didn't get selected. I'd be interested to see what their roster looks like this year. He doesn't really have any alliances anywhere, so I think McGee could make a choice if he decides to go to War Ready or Florida TNT.
Or anywhere. He's a true free agent because there's no Wofford alum. So he could literally just go to the sort of the best situation for him. He could end up anywhere, really.
Yeah.
The TNT thing was hilarious. Terry's already given us grief for not listing him as a higher seed in the bracketology. We've already heard from Terry. So hey, Terry, good to hear from you. Yeah, we love Terry. Terry's good people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think he'll come out with another roster like that again, because that roster was the first roster that came out, and he had those names of like, whoa, that really looks like a very talented team. I'm not sure how they would be defensively, but they look like they had a chance to just run you out of the building scoring wise.
The best defense is just to score more than the other team. Okay, so that's our transfer portal. Now, we're going to ask Tom to stay around because Charge taking the night off. Charge's a little tired. We're going to actually do that a little bit more this season, where one or the other takes the night off to make sure we keep the production schedule up. So we're going to ask Tom to comment on some things he actually just learned tonight is going to help with as the guest host. So this year we did a top 25. We're going to start doing a periodic top 25 as opposed to just the bracketology. And we actually got voters. We actually went and got some voters. So Tim Scarborough, Chris Vosters, Charge, and myself all voted for a top 25. And it was interesting because it's early, so we're kind of guessing at the rosters. So we had an also receiving votes category of teams that some people thought belong. So every one of these teams you see was rated in one of the four of our top 25. Some were listed in multiple, some were only listed in one. So what's a team out of this, Tom, do you think could really be a threat to make that trip to Dayton?
Looking at that first, I like three teams. I like primetime players. I think they made
Chris Thomas is a friend of the pod. Good dude.
Yeah, he's a great dude. I think if they get Christian Keeling again, I think they're a team to watch. Team Jimmy V's always got a good team. And I was really intrigued last year. They got Hassim Thabit to come and play for them, who was trying to make an NBA comeback. It doesn't look like it's materializing. I'd love to see him play again, just to play. But the team that really stands out to me the most here is Gale Nation.
Yeah, I mean, if they get Machado back, they're always dangerous. I've seen them live at the TBT a few times. Like, they're definitely a team that can really run and score a lot of points. So we don't double cover things. I actually like the teams you do too. But the things that stand out for me a little bit, one, Category 5 at 30, the Miami alum. I mean, are they going to get Larkin? That's what I want to know. Is Shane Larkin going to play? That's all I care about. Like, if Larkin plays, you're looking at a roster. Tom's shaking his head.
I don't think so. He's in the EuroLeague. I don't think if Heinz could play, I'm sure Larkin could play. I know that they would probably have Julian Gamble. We saw Kenny Kaji. He played for Eberline when I went down there for Utah. I'd love to see him play. I just don't see it happening. Yeah. I think he's still got a chance to – I know he made an NBA comeback. I still think he's got a chance to be on like an NBA roster again. I don't know if that's going to happen. I know he's playing great in the EuroLeague. I just don't see him playing.
No, fair enough. I mean, there's a lot of really intriguing teams on bottom half. Fort Wayne, too, had some guys coming back when they lost some people to – again, when Armored Athlete became the combined Gale Nation Fort Wayne Armored team last year. That was relatively interesting. So that's some guys coming back here as well. We also have some teams we're not even sure running, like Team Colorado with Marcus Hall. Are they going to run? I rank them, so I'm curious if they run. They always have a good squad. But if they don't run, obviously, where's Marcus Hall goes also a question. Okay, so we did the top 25, and this is the composite ranking. So some people are higher than lower. We start with the bottom 5, 21 and 25. Again, Stillwater, that TNT squad. Maybe they get McGee, maybe they don't. The Mackey squad, always a tough Purdue squad. Power the Paul, physical team. And the Darlings of the Dance last year, D2, came in at number 25 here. Tom, what stands out of those top 5 or the bottom 5 teams of the rankings?
I think Men of Mackey. I think they have a chance to move up this year. Always a physical team. I think that's a good alumni team. I think they've yet to put their best team out there. I think there's a chance they have a better team than they've had before. We spoke about Florida TNT earlier. Team D2. Those are all really good teams, and I would agree with their rankings right now. I think show me your roster, and there's a chance you move up in the preseason rankings.
Okay, the most fascinating thing about the 16 through 20, and this is just an interesting thing of how this worked, is the cheaters were nominated by one person, but he had him in the top 10. And I think it's purely as on Casper Ware. If Ware plays for the cheaters, they're a threat. It's basically, they have a good team, let's be clear, but he's the one that puts them over the top. I remember really being intrigued last year with War Tampa, which is now War Ready. Charge and I were both really high on them. We had them winning one game. I had them winning two against Carmen's crew. They came out and laid a colossal egg. First-time teams do that. They're going to have a lot of talent and a lot of alumni base with the guys from Auburn. So I think this team will definitely be psyched to improve. What stands out on this from you, Tom?
I think, like you said, the War Ready, they put up a dunker last year, but yeah, I think their alumni support will be there. They'll be in the tournament. LA Cheaters, yeah, I think if Casper Ware plays for them, they'll be over the top. They actually, hopefully they've learned from their mistakes in the past. They had a chance to beat Eberline in Utah, and they kept trying to go for that game-winning 3 as opposed to just go for a quick 2. And I don't know. I have to just go with my gut. I've loved Team ALS since the beginning. You got to think that they're going to put out a great roster this year.
Yeah, I mean, the Sean Marshall, because Sean Marshall is retired, it looks like. So will he still play in this event? Will he just be a recruiter? That's an interesting question we're going to have to answer. So this is a really, to me, this is where we start to get some heavyweights. Also some really interesting stories. So like Brotherly Love, we actually had, I believe, around the 5 or 6 seed line for the Brandology. We have him here at 15. And Danny Holtzman, their GM, actually got in touch with me and was talking about how they were underseeded. We told them we agreed, but there are sort of like making the seeds work for matchups. They're going to be a really dangerous team because Philly guys can ball. Boeheim's a little lower. I actually was the low ranking, and I share my life with my girlfriend's a huge Boeheim's Army fan, so I'm going to catch grief for this. But I think they're a team that still has immense talent, but is getting a little older. Like Aaron Devendorf, still, you put him at the top of a 1-4 high. I mean, it's over. He'll score, but do they want to make him be their primary offensive engine much longer? Do they have to have Malachi Richardson? Can they get Brandology to come play for them? And then we've already mentioned House of Pain at length, obviously, with the Dom. And do they get Brandon Paul? Can you elaborate something on here hitting you pretty hard too, or?
No, I would agree with you on Boeheim's Army. A name that really stands out to me is Dion Waiters. Do they get Dion?
Oh, yeah.
Dion Waiters, I think, was on the fence of retiring from the NBA. I'm not sure if he's ever made that official announcement. Does he come home and play with them?
That would be amazing.
That would be amazing.
That would be absolutely amazing.
I have to go with the team that really stands out to me. I think that they should be ranked a lot higher is Best Virginia.
Yeah, that was actually one we had a lot of disparate views about. People ranked them higher and lower. It was really interesting. That was a litmus test in our rankings.
Yeah, I think Best Virginia is at that point where they have guys that they could play. I mean, I've spoken with Chuck Bryant. Chuck Bryant doesn't know if he wants to play yet, said he might want to. They've yet to ever get Joe Alexander to commit. Joe Alexander playing in Israel. But I think that they have a good core. You know, Kevin Jones. Deshaun Butler is listed as coach now. He retired from playing. He's a big loss. But I think Best Virginia, depending on how their roster shapes out, I think they should be in the top 10. And then the money team, I'm good friends with David Nurse. I think last year they had too many mouths to feed with that roster.
There's only one ball. Yeah, there's only one ball.
One ball, yeah. And I think last year they were making line changes. They were changing 5 guys in. They had 5 guys out. It looked like hockey out there. You can't really do that. If you're going to have 10 guys, you have to have 8 guys play consistently on the court and let everybody know, hey, you might not play that much, but you're still getting a share of the money. And I think that just ruined their momentum. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that was a high-scoring first half or first quarter for them, and then that was it for them. Didn't they score over 40 points in the first quarter, I believe?
They went nuts early and then had a problem later, if
Yeah.
memory serves. You mentioned the playoff share thing, or the share of the money. Are you a equal shares guy or a wage shares guy?
I think you got to share the money equally.
I would agree with that.
You build a roster, and if you're the 10th guy that's not playing or plays 3 or 4 minutes a quarter or a half, you're still on the roster. Split the money equally. I mean, at the same time, you look at the NBA teams, they're not going 12 deep, 10 deep in their bench. I think if the money team wants to do that, they can't do what they did last year.
Fair enough.
That team was too talented.
To go out early, yeah.
I think they're a combination of team for debt also now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you can't do that. That team is way too talented to do what they did.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so we're getting to the top 10 now, and you notice the 10 was actually a tie. Money Team and Eberline actually ended up at the same point. Now you're getting some really interesting teams. Eberline, the questions are, can they stave off the alumni poll? So we're going to talk about that as our closing, about the alumni part. Team Arkansas, this is a volatile seed because with Barford added, it probably ends the underdogs, but also it makes them really dangerous to add 1 or 2 more players. So they can even move up higher. Heard that, they keep Ja'Cory, it seems right. They lose Ja'Cory, they might tumble a few spots. And Armored is going to have to really fight to keep a lot of their roster together, I think. It's a pretty interesting group of 5, though. These are all title contenders at this point, but title contenders with questions.
Yeah, a lot of that. I don't think Herd that can afford to lose Ja'Cory Williams. I don't think Herd that can afford, with all the hype that they have, I think the pressure's on them because you can't lose the first game in the first round after all the hype that they've been receiving. I think the pressure's on them the most. We spoke about the other teams. I think Team Arkansas, I really like Team Arkansas. I'm hoping they get some of their alumni there, and I think that they could be top 5. Eberline Drive, I wouldn't be shocked if they had a talented roster. And I know, Matt's going to come up with that roster, and, they'll be there.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. They're going to be a contender. So no more surprises now. If you're on this list, you kind of know where we're going, and we'll do these individually. Carmen's Crew, they have a championship. They have a chip. They get to play on their home floor. What do you think? Are they still one of the creme de la creme of the tournament?
Yeah, and I don't know if they have announced it yet, but Jared Sullinger is making a comeback. Does he play?
That's the question, right? That helps them a lot if he plays. If he plays, then this seed might even be, or this ranking might be too low.
Yeah, Carmen's Crew, top 5.
And just to continue the argument, even though he's not here, Charge and I just batted this one back and forth about Red Scare or Carmen's Crew for the 1 seed. But we actually both agreed at this point, even though I put the Red Scare as a 2 seed due to the fact Carmen's does have a title in the last 2 years. But at this exact moment, I think the Red Scare's roster is a hair better than Carmen's Crew's.
I think it's close.
Really close.
Yeah, I think Red Scare's up there.
Yeah, and though these 2 teams tied, we're out of surprises now. You know what the rest of it's going to be. Sideline Cancer, after being a relatively low seed, Billy Clapper always gets a really good team with a lot of great shooters. The unsung hero of that team to me was Eric Thompson because he does all the dirty work, asks no questions, just puts his body in the way and springs those guys with screens to get shots. That kind of rebounding and guts out of a center, knowing he's not going to touch the ball a lot on offense, knowing he's just got to work, really helped unlock those shooters last year. I found it to be a really inspiring way to play center, actually.
Yeah, I think they're going to come out with a good roster, and we talked about it earlier. I spoke with him before the tournament. Diamond Stone got hurt.
Yeah.
And he didn't play. I think they move on from him. He also signed to play in Canada this year. I'd be interested to see how they fill their roster out around the shooters, but there's no reason why they shouldn't be. I would put them a hair above I would have Overseas Elite as 3. I don't think they would be tied.
They actually, we tied them. They got the votes. We just did an actual vote, and they actually tied on points. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, with Overseas Elite, we mentioned earlier, they have a bunch of St. John's alum. I think Paris Horn's days are done. He had an injury a few years ago. He's been a coach for the past couple years, so you got to take him out of the mix. Burrell, their big guy, he's getting older. I think DJ Kennedy is still the main force. They really missed McCollum.
Yeah.
I think you bring DJ Kennedy back, McCollum. You got to get a big guy. You got to get a really good big guy. I know Burrell's still there. If Burrell comes back, maybe he moves to the bench. Joe Johnson's a big if. I know last year they had Jared Jack listed on the roster. Do they get guys with former NBA experience?
Bring me Jeremy Lin.
I would love to see him.
I would love to see Jeremy Lin in this. That'd be great. So Tom, I mean, is there any surprise who the 1 seed's going to be? The unanimous number 1 pick? I mean, is there any shock about who's number 1?
No, I don't think there's a shock there. I'm interested to see who they could possibly add to that team. I mean, even if they didn't change it, I mean, that's just a very hard team to beat. And I really like Dwight Bikes on that team.
Yeah, really good player. Odom, really solid player. Okay, so
Odom got hurt. I'm not sure the extent of his injury.
Oh, no.
He's in a walking boot. He was in a walking boot, I believe. He's playing over in France, so I'm hoping he's okay by the summer.
Here's hoping. I mean, we got some time. We got about 90 days still. Okay, so that gives you our top 25. We have one more segment we're going to do, and we're going to answer this. So this will close us out, Tom. But this is just a general question we got to ask. We're going to take a question. So if you want to ask a question for the Zoomcast, we're going to ask them occasionally. Just tag us on Twitter, and we will answer a question in one show. And today's question is this, from Herd Thoughts. A bit of a question for you. When I think of the original TBT, I think of teams like Overseas Elite, D2, Sideline Cancer, Brother Love, Peoria, Primetime. Non-alumni teams. Is TBT at risk of losing its identity and becoming an alumni tournament rather than a best of all? So how's that hit you, Tom? I think it's a really interesting question with a lot of ways to attack it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I've loved this tournament from the beginning. I would love to see a tournament of all alumni teams one day, but at the same time, their TBT's identity has just been these squads that are coming together. And I think I think the TBT's eventually got to cap, they got to cap alumni teams, I guess, to some extent, because, Overseas Elite has got to be there. That's a great team name. They showed that they were Overseas Elite for X amount of years. You got to love the causes, Team ALS, Sideline Cancer, Brotherly Love. Then you got to love like the primetime players. Those guys are semi-pros. And then, yeah, I don't know if they're at the risk of losing their identity. I think, a balanced mix of alumni teams and the originals make the tournament the best. When you start losing some of the originals, I think that's when you maybe start losing some fans.
Well, I think what's interesting about this is like there's the reality brass tacks, but there's also sort of the flavor of it. The alumni teams will make more money for the tournament, and let's be clear, like this is a sporting endeavor, but this is also a business venture. Let's not kid ourselves here. We have a lot of respect for the people from TBT. We're obviously massive fans, and them going full alum would make them more money. Let's just be very clear about what that would mean. If you have a 64-team alumni tournament, that would be better for their bottom line. There's just no question about that. Having said that, there is something to be said for having these teams that have a history of the odd stories. And let's not forget, you're talking about all those great teams, and they're all great. Let's give some love to the teams that also provide flavor at different parts of the bracket. Like the Kimchi Express are always a team that comes and plays hard. They're a story. They're fun. Going back a longer time, even though they weren't necessarily great, I mean, things like the Pistol Shrimps. I mean, these sort of stories, a bunch of guys coming out and playing against high-level pros and saying, hey, we can hang. There is a part of that has to remain. My solution at some point isn't to cap the alumni teams or to even start pushing teams and our alumni out. Is as this tournament gets more popular, I think it expands past 64 teams. We're not there yet. To get a good field, I think 64 is a good number with the talent they have now. But I see this becoming an 80, a 96 team tournament in the future. I mean, Tom, do you think maybe expansion might be a way, or play-ins or pods to keep the flavor while also letting these alumni teams really root for the home team?
Yeah, I think maybe if you had like a pod or something, you got to think the TBT's got a certain window with some of these overseas players because
between summer league and yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I would think a pod would be cool. Maybe you expand to maybe kind of like the NCAA tournament where you have 68 teams and you have teams play to get in, or you have like a pod where maybe they play a week before and that winner ends up being in the actual TBT tournament. I think the expansion is definitely something that they have to consider.
And it's the two things you just mentioned, they've done before. 2 years ago, they were a 72-team tournament. So they had the 16s play the 18s, 15s play the 18s, 16s play the 17s, and they had the Jamboree. They had that before as well. So, I mean, they are definitely something they're going to play with. So I think this question that Heard Thoughts, and thanks for asking the question again when we release this, but the answer to that isn't so much an either or. It's still going to be both, I think. Well, anyway, Tom. So anyway, that's sort of the sort of planned part of the show. So Tom, thanks for being our guest today, by the way. Really appreciate it.
No problem, man. That was fun.
Any final thoughts before we stop taping about like early thoughts about how the tournament's looking? Like you're going to try to cover this in person, right?
I don't think I'm going to be able to cover it in person this year. I'm getting married, but
Why are you doing that? That sounds like a waste of time.
Yeah, I know. It's actually was postponed because of everything. So I'm actually going to be talking with some teams and running some articles and like roster previews. I hope to do some maybe Instagram lives with some teams and just, hear what teams are about, talk to guys about their career and why they're playing. Because some guys don't really understand the tournament until they play in it. And then once they get their foot wet in this tournament, some guys, they keep coming back. So, and then they keep coming back with a different team until they get better. So I'm interested to see. I want to talk with a few teams. I'm definitely going to reach out to Eberline Drive, the Money Team, Gale Nation, Team Arkansas. I definitely want to see how these rosters shape out and, what their goals are and how they're going to run their team.
I'm laughing because Keith's always a good interview because he's hilarious. Keith's a really funny guy at Team Arkansas. So that's pretty funny. Okay, well, Tom, thanks for coming on. I guess we'll sign off here. So, guys, thanks for coming on. Thanks for watching us. This is Charge and Hainer present ZoomTheTBT. And until next time, enjoy your evening.